All right, everybody, here's our discussion of Michael Crichton's 1990 novel Jurassic Park. Now, the study guide that you have has two sets of page numbers. I know the study guide that is on your Canvas site, visible right there, has only one set of page numbers. But I have, just before recording this video, uploaded a printable study guide that it has two sets of page numbers. One set of page numbers refers to this edition, which was published in paperback in, I don't know, 94 or 95, something like that. And the other edition, or the other set of page numbers, refers to this one, which is probably the one that most of you have, because this was published in 2015, so obviously that's newer. The underlined page numbers refer to this edition. The page numbers in bold print refer to this edition. But it's the same novel. It's the same content, just the pagination is off a little bit. So, depending upon which one of these you have, well, you'll find out as soon as you start trying to correlate the page numbers with the study guide. So, okay, on with the talk. This is one of those rare science fiction novels that has become more hard science fiction in the decades since it was published than when it was new. Most science fiction is published, and even if it's fairly hard science fiction, meaning it falls closer to the probable end of the possibility continuum, the science fiction becomes softer then as science catches up with and sometimes surpasses what is in the novel. So it becomes less probable the more that we learn about how the universe works. But Jurassic Park is different. It's one of those rare novels in which the science has become more believable because advances in biotechnology, genetic engineering, and that sort of thing have been tremendous in the 30 plus years since this was published. So now it's still not possible for, as far as we know, for DNA to remain preserved even in amber for 65 million years, but there are samples of DNA that are thousands of years old, and there's talk of bringing back various extinct animals. Whether we should or not is a whole different question. But yeah, the science itself is it seems much more possible now than it did when the novel was first published, so it's pretty rare. But here's the thing. Obviously, it's a dinosaur novel. But the dinosaurs, they just provide, the gosh, wow factor. That's the revelation of wonder. That's the stuff that's entertaining. The real point of the novel, the two big themes, well, I guess there's one primary theme, really, the one primary theme, and that is the dangers of incautious, profit-driven behavior. We get this theme referred to in the introduction when there is this discussion of how biotechnology has the potential to change the world, and yet it is all but completely unregulated, this tremendous power. And then the novel, Crichton has a real talent for blending fact with fiction, and where the fact leaves off, where the reality leaves off, and where the fiction picks up, he has a real talent for blurring that line. And in this book, obviously, InGen, that's not a real corporation. BioSyn, that's not a real company. And no one has brought back dinosaurs, obviously. But the idea of the privatization of science for profit is a scary one. And the scariness of that and the dangers of such profit-driven, incautious behavior, that is the primary theme of this book. The study guide that you have for this is far more thorough than most study guides that I've made. In fact, what I did was actually just upload the notes that I use when lecturing. So you have a very detailed set of notes complete with comments about where the themes are, exactly what pages and in what chapters and all that kind of thing. So that should be very helpful. And that's one of the reasons this video probably will not turn out to be very long, because you have my notes right in front of you. Okay, the first thing to realize is what an iteration is. An iteration is the repetition of a process that begins where the previous iteration of the process left off. I'll repeat that. An iteration is the repetition of a process or a cycle that begins where the previous cycle left off. For example, we might say that the course you're in right now, Introduction to Literature, is the latest iteration of this course as taught by me. I have probably taught Introduction to Literature 60 times, 50 or 60 times over the decades. Oh my. And it's never exactly the same way twice. And the study guides and stuff are never exactly the same way twice. So, and this is the first time, this is the first time I have delivered the course entirely online. So while much of the material, say the bulk of the material that you're reading, the primary material is the same as in many recent iterations of this course. Some of the details are different, and some of the actual works are a little different. And the way that I am delivering the material is affecting exactly how I phrase the content. So you are in the latest iteration of my Introduction to Literature course. This book, you'll notice, is divided up into, 7, 8 iterations? Pardon me as I check my notes here. 7 iterations. Okay. So you're like, well, so what is the process that is going on in each of these? If an iteration is the repetition of a process or the repetition of a cycle, what's the cycle here? Okay, well, I'm glad you asked that question, because there is a very similar sequence of events going on in each iteration. What you're seeing on your screen now is a rough map of the iterations of events, the cycles of events that happen in each main section of the novel Jurassic Park. And it all begins with this privatization of science for profit. That's sort of the background thing. And so that's sort of the understood beginning of each iteration. Now, each time this cycle begins, it's driven by greed. We might even say it's driven by hubris, in the case of some characters, such as John Hammond. This pride, this lack of humility in the face of nature, and this greed, this desire for, money, leads to reckless behavior. Behavior without thoroughly thinking through the possible consequences of what it is that the individual, the character, is going to do. The behavior is rash, the behavior is selfish. Now, central to this is something that crops up in the island of Dr. Moreau as well. Although in that lecture we did not talk specifically about this, but we should have. In the island of Dr. Moreau, you will recall, the law is a set of prohibitions that the beast people recite over and over and over again. And the idea is that artificial law, artificial boundaries can restrict nature. And of course, it doesn't. It fails. Okay? The natural instincts, the natural behavior of the beast people inevitably come to the forefront, and the law, ultimately, this artificial attempt to control them, does not work. We have something of the same thing here in Jurassic Park, although the artificial control of nature here takes the form of genetic manipulation, physical barriers, such as fences and whatnot, and computerized monitoring. Now, the genetic manipulation, they've made all the dinosaurs female, we are told, and we're going to run through the material, the content of the novel here in just a moment. And also, they have tried to make them dependent upon artificial sources of the amino acid lysine. And through means that we will get into, neither of these things works. The dinosaurs do not all stay female, and they do not remain dependent upon being supplied lysine by the staff of the park. The physical barriers, the electric fences and the walls and so forth, of course, those prove inadequate as soon as the electricity goes down. The computerized monitoring, that fails, we learned from nearly the very beginning, because whoever set up the system simply was too rash, had too much hubris to think that these other attempts of artificial control could possibly fail. So all they were concerned about was making sure that no dinosaurs escaped the, profit-gathering compound. They weren't concerned about counting the actual number of dinosaurs via the computer monitoring, but rather just counting how many they expected to see. And Henry Wu, that character, makes a great point at one place in the novel about the difference between people wanting reality and people wanting their expectation of reality. Well, this gets us to another thing in the novel, another semi-theme, I suppose, which is the vulnerability of technology and its failure. The genetic manipulation fails. I do not know why these bullet points are offset like this, but they just are. These aren't subpoints of this one. I just messed up somehow. The computers crash, of course, and that is done on purpose. Rash, selfish behavior because of Dennis Nedry. But the computerized monitoring, of course, that goes wrong because, again, of hubris and rash behavior, not from Dennis Nedry, but on the part of whoever set up the monitoring. And the physical barriers, of course, are insufficient as soon as the electricity goes down. Well, this leads to catastrophe. People being eaten by dinosaurs. And that's generally the end of each iteration, and the next time around, it all begins again. And at the beginning of the whole thing is the privatization of science for profit, driven by greed, leading to reckless behavior. That our artificial control of nature fails, the technology fails, and the result is catastrophe. So that is generally how things go in each iteration of the novel. Now, I'm not going to go specifically through every event that happens in the novel. The set of notes that you have before you is very detailed about that. So you can look at that and just sort of correlate the things that I'm talking about with the elements that are on, the notes. There's lots of foreshadowing. Well, first we'll start in the introduction, I suppose. We've already mentioned the introduction brings up this idea of the privatization of science, science for profit, and that's dangerous. Okay, getting into the prologue, an American physician is brought a patient whom she told was injured in a construction accident, but the patient is delirious and is rambling about being attacked by a raptor or an evil spirit or something. I don't recall exactly what he's talking about. A raptor. And the physician is told that means a type of evil spirit, which of course we know it doesn't, but there it is. In the first iteration, there is a lot of foreshadowing. A little girl is bitten by a lizard, which we know isn't a lizard, and the lizard is incorrectly identified or not identified through a series of accidents. We learn that a group of these lizards kill a baby. We even hear about someone working at, where is it? Let me check here. Technician at the Tropical Disease Center sees the first little girl's drawing of the lizard that bit her and says, it's a dinosaur. My kid's drawn those in school. And of course, this person is, mocked and then ignored. And we, the readers, are like, oh, if only they'd paid attention. Because we know it's a dinosaur. And I think probably even the very first readers of this novel knew that it was about dinosaurs. Look at that cover. How can you look at that cover and not know, hey, that's about dinosaurs? Even when the novel was brand new, there was dramatic irony going on because we, the readers, know it's about dinosaurs and dinosaur-driven catastrophe. But the characters don't, at least not yet. In the second iteration, we start meeting our main characters, especially our protagonists, who are Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler. We meet them on a dig site near Snakewater, Montana, which is not a real place, but, they tried to Crichton tried to make up a name that would sound like a town in Montana, I guess. We also meet Ian Malcolm, who is another protagonist. He's not at the dig site. And we meet the antagonists, at least a couple of them so far. We meet John Hammond, and we meet Dennis Nedry, although we get a lot more Hammond and a lot more Nedry a little bit later in the book. And we don't yet know they are antagonists, but we'll figure that out soon enough. Okay, the theme is introduced to the vulnerability of technology almost as soon as we meet Alan Grant, because he's at a dig site, and they are trying to use sonic vibrations in the ground to identify the location and position of some fossilized raptor remains, velociraptor remains. And it's just not working out very well for Grant. He's not good with machines. So that tells us right away, I'll bet there's something with machines that's going to be going on, and it's not going to work out that well for Grant. And indeed, the machines don't work out for him, as we talked about here just a few minutes ago. The for-profit mentality of corporate science is emphasized through the description of the biosyn rabies vaccine case. And, that name, biosyn, although they spell it, Crichton spells it with a Y, that's a big flashing metaphor sign, biological sin, S-I-N, oh my. That was a disaster, we were told. This was not a thing that actually happened, although things like it have happened. But biosyn specifically does not exist. Grant and Sattler and Malcolm are taken to Jurassic Park, where they learn, oh my God, these guys have brought back dinosaurs, kind of, sort of. And we get Ian Malcolm as kind of the voice of conscience of the novel when he's talking about chaos theory, and how chaos theory tells us that setting up a system as complex as that which is necessary to control these dinosaurs, it's just not going to work. And they have a discussion about zoos and how, zoos contain animals all the time and that sort of thing. And Malcolm makes the point that, well, no, they don't. Animals escape from zoos regularly, and this isn't a zoo. This is an attempt to recreate an entire, long-gone ecosystem. So it's far more complex than a zoo, and even zoos don't do it that well. And Malcolm, as we see, is correct. Now, don't ask me to say anything else about chaos theory. I will tell you, though, that the illustrations at the beginnings of the iterations, I'll try to find one here. And of course, now that I didn't plan to do this, oh yeah, these things, these are called fractals. And don't ask me to say anything more about fractals. I'm not a math guy, so I can't. But I'm told these are fractals, and you notice they get more complex and, frankly, more chaotic looking with each iteration, mimicking the way or mirroring the way that events for the characters continue to spin out of control. In the third iteration, the theme of negative, destructive repercussions is brought up almost immediately through Grant's musing that if dinosaurs can be recreated, then his field, paleobiology, will itself be extinct. Now, by the end of the novel, we know that's not the case, but that's how it seems to Grant, at least as the third iteration starts. Okay, in the third iteration, we meet several minor characters. We meet Tim, we meet Lexi, we meet Henry Wu, we meet John Hammond, and a few other folks. I guess we meet Ed Regis earlier in the second iteration, maybe even the first. But we meet a bunch of folks here. We get an example of the incautious behavior when Ellie Sattler observes the really nice-looking plants that are set around the swimming pool in the hotel complex where the guests will stay, hypothetically, eventually, although it doesn't have it. And some of those plants are poisonous. They were planted because they look great, but no one gave any thought to the fact that there will be people, probably including children, intended to be running around here, and you don't want to have deadly plants right here. And this idea comes up later also when Ellie comes across the Stegosaurus that is very ill because, it seems, some of the things that it has been eating are modern plants and they do not sit well with it. There's a discussion/argument between Malcolm and Hammond about whether the park will fail. And Malcolm is really emphasizing that Hammond is attempting artificially to control nature, and he predicts that nature will win. And of course, as we find out, he is correct. And Malcolm notes that dinosaurs probably already have escaped the park, and we find out soon enough that, again, he's correct. Around a page, I really said that, around page 100 or so, we get a multi-page description of the background science. And it sounds really good. It's a very real sounding description. And as I said, I mean, it sounded real even when the novel was new, although actual scientists at the time were like, yeah, no, you can't do that. In fact, there's a place in the novel where, I don't recall exactly where this is, but Dennis Nedry is musing on the Human Genome Project, which, as we know, has now been completed for quite some time. Henry Wu continues to talk about how they will be controlling the dinosaurs, and Malcolm just continually refutes these assertions, saying, I don't care how well you think you've designed things, it's not going to work. And as we know, Malcolm is correct. Okay, now there's a discussion between Wu and Hammond, and this is in your edition probably. If you have the newer edition, that's the one with the white cover, somewhere in the 130s. And Wu clearly feels a mixture of sort of triumph and yet regret about being a part of this project, because we get the impression Wu is thinking maybe this wasn't a good idea. And there's that discussion between Wu and Hammond about making more domesticated dinosaurs, because they've discovered the real dinosaurs, especially the raptors, just move too damn fast. You can hardly even see them when they go to kill their prey and so forth. And there has been discussion just a few pages earlier of this, or description, I guess, showing the raptors' intelligence and their cooperation and their hunting skills, and just basically how dangerous they are. But in this discussion, when Wu suggests that they modify the genetics of the dinosaurs to slow them down, Hammond just scoffs at this. He says, Henry, people don't want domesticated dinosaurs, they want the real thing. And this is when we get that really excellent line from Henry Wu. One of the things that I like about literature is that there can be instances where an author just puts forth something that really rings true with your experience, or is some truism or shrewd observation about human nature. And boy, this is one of them. This is when Henry Wu says, and in, let's see, in here, it's about page 122, and in here, it's about page 137. Wu says, no, people don't want reality. They want their expectation of reality. And that is not the same thing. If ever truer words were written by any writer, anytime, anywhere, I don't know what they would be. Because people don't want reality. They want their expectation of reality. I don't want reality. My reality in many ways blows. What I would like is what I expected my reality would be like when I was younger. Now, there's a lot about my reality that's pretty darn good too, but there are some aspects of it that absolutely suck. Won't get into it, but man, I could ramble. I much rather would have my expectations. But I don't, because we know life does not work that way. But for Hammond, life does work that way, because he's wealthy. So we get the impression he's generally been able to get whatever he wants. And what he wants now is a tremendous financial success. But this time, he's not going to get it. When it is shown that the dinosaurs are breeding, it's pages 160 and following in here, about page 180 and following in this edition, we learn that Malcolm was correct. Things are not going according to plan. And everyone involved with the park is shocked, and Malcolm's, of course, not shocked at all. He's like, yeah, no, of course they're not going according to plan. Something this complex, how could they possibly do that? And yeah, so things are not going well. Then things really start going downhill when we learn that Dennis Nedry is an antagonist. He is out to steal genetic materials and deliver them to a rival company So he arranges for the computers to go down and the power to go down long enough for him to steal genetic materials and then get out of the park, and everything is just going to be great for him. And, well, he gets eaten. So things don't work out for him. And in the process of things not working out for him, things don't work out for anybody else either. The fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh iterations are mostly plot stuff. We've said plot is the sequence of events, and so it's people running from dinosaurs and others getting eaten by dinosaurs, and the bad guys get their comeuppance, and most of the good guys of whatever gender, guys of whatever gender, turn out to be alive and so forth at the end of the novel. Most of them. So there's no sense in going blow by blow through the fourth through seventh iterations, but we will mention just a few things. Around page 215 or so in here, Hammond is reflecting upon his desire to make enormous profits, and of course he's not going to, as we know. In the fifth iteration, Malcolm, who by this point has been severely injured, Malcolm has multiple rants about basically the hubris of humankind. And there's that wonderful exchange where he says to Ellie Sattler, essentially, we have to get things under control or you know what will happen. And Ellie Sattler says, oh, we'll destroy the planet. And Malcolm says, oh my God, no. We can't destroy the planet. The planet will be fine. What we'll destroy is ourselves. And he's right. And we could set off all the nuclear bombs in the world and, give it enough thousands of years and life will return, except ours. Okay, we won't. We'll just murder the hell out of ourselves, but eventually the planet will recover. So that's kind of how important we are to it in the grand scheme of things. And if you look at your study guide, you'll see 3 or 4 different Malcolm rants that are indicated. So go take a look at each of those. And Michael Crichton has stated that Ian Malcolm became his favorite character as he was writing the novel. Malcolm is kind of his mouthpiece. And Crichton has admitted that, the novel is a little too preachy with Malcolm's, just very blunt, over-the-top statements of things that Crichton wants to get across. But it still works. Malcolm's my favorite character, too. And by the way, the sequel to this novel, The Lost World, the sequel novel's better than the sequel movie, although I like that movie also. Malcolm is alive in that novel. He is the main character, the main protagonist. And Crichton just admits that there's no reason for it, other than that Jurassic Park wasn't an enormous hit. It was an enormous hit. So he just sort of dispenses with Malcolm's being alive at the beginning of The Lost World, with Malcolm saying essentially, reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, and that's all there is to it. Alrighty. Sixth and seventh iterations are just plot stuff. In the seventh iteration, Malcolm is stressing the unimportance of humanity of humankind to the planet. And Hammond, John Hammond, and in this edition it's the 420s somewhere. In this edition it's the early 380s pages. Hammond, like Dr. Moreau, takes no responsibility. He's musing about how the disaster is everyone's fault. Henry Wu was never really the man for the job. Muldoon was a drunk, and so on and so forth. And Hammond says, boy, he'll do better next time. He'll hire people that won't make this a disaster. So Hammond is blaming everybody but himself. Now you might go, well, he's kind of blaming himself because he's saying he hired the wrong people. Yeah, no, he's not. He's saying, I mean, I guess you can make that argument, but I don't really think it works. Because for Hammond to really be taking responsibility, he would have to be saying, this project was a bad idea from the start. But he never does that. He never says, I had too much hubris. My desire to make bucket loads of money should not have brought me to doing this kind of thing. But he doesn't do that. And then we get the most wonderful situational irony, do we not? When Hammond is killed by the very creatures he thought would make him rich, wealthy beyond the dreams of avarice, as the old cliche goes. And the irony is even thicker because it's not even a big cool dinosaur that murders him. It's not a T-Rex. It's not the raptors. It's the compies, Procompsognathus, the little chicken-sized dinosaurs that kill him. Hammond is killed by his own creations, and it's not even the really dangerous ones. It's the little funky ones. Oh, John Hammond. Then we get our epilogue, of course. And I don't know exactly what we would say about the final lines of the novel, except that they sound pretty darned ominous. And maybe this is Crichton's way of saying that if we don't get biotechnology under control, if this commercialization, this privatization of science for profit is not brought under control, then we are headed as a species for a bad end. Grant and Ellie Sattler are being detained in Costa Rica, and Marty Gutierrez, I'm probably butchering that name, apologies, has basically said, yeah, you're going to be here with us for a while. Final lines of the book. Grant said, "You're telling me we're not going anywhere?" "None of us is going anywhere, Dr. Grant," Gutierrez said, smiling, and then he turned and walked back to the entrance of the hotel. That's a great closing line. None of us is going anywhere. And as I say, I don't know exactly what to make of that, but I think that's Crichton saying, if we don't get our act together, act is not what I was going to say, but I thought, well, you know, who knows how long this video will last. I better say act. Unless we get the whole privatization, commercialization of science, the drive for profit, and the hubris of humankind under control, we got problems coming. Okay, so that is our pretty quick talk, actually, about the novel Jurassic Park. And as I mentioned, because you have my detailed notes in front of you, go through those, look at that map, back this up. In fact, I'll upload an image of the sort of sequence of events in the iterations. So look at that, know those stages in the iterations. That is almost certain to be an exam question. Look for examples of verisimilitude. Know what the background science is. I don't mean be able to explain it in detail, but just know it has to do with biotechnology and cloning and genetic manipulation. And and know that this big theme is the badness, what a bad idea it is to engage in reckless, rash behavior for profit. In this case, the reckless behavior is the privatization and commercialization of science and then its application for profit rather than for the common good. All right. That's what we have for Jurassic Park.